And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to GeekWatch, a subsidiary of the Monastery, the open bar of the internet. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have one good brother and one good sister here in the temple, making her return after several weeks. And in fact, technically speaking, this is all of our triumphant return since I've been sick for the last few weeks. We have our newest Wukong, good sister Miss Starlight, and
hello.
In the red corner, because he is the Red Oni, we have the man of 1,000 runes, the CEO of Zadare Enterprises, and the bane of my fucking existence, good brother Xanatrix, who
I've
I've
already. Oh, go ahead.
I've heard that you're trying to bankroll the Desire Grand Prix.
I mean, I would certainly bankroll it better than Girori. Especially considering that I don't even think Girori bankrolls it. But if I did bankroll the Desire Grand Prix, you can definitely be assured that a game master who interferes in the game would suffer retirement.
If you don't get the joke, watch Kamen Rider Geats because the rules apply, and now the Me6 bot is working.
Took it a few moments.
hmm Yeah, the notification bot that I use on Discord Me6 is temperamental at times. I'll phrase it like that anyway. But it's good to be back doing this. Like I said, I was sick for a few weeks. Before anyone asks, no, it was not the coof, or the Wu flu, or the Chinese virus, whichever you prefer. I did not take a dance with Corona-chan. If she shows up in my house, then she gets booted out like she's the goddess of poverty.
God damn.
And some people think I'm being figurative when I'd say I would kick her out. No, I'm being quite literal. I wear steel-toed boots, people. And before anyone says, "Isn't that a little excessive?" No. The if when you absolutely positively have to get a motherfucker out of the house, accept no substitutes.
Except no substitutes, indeed.
Uh, and or if for those of you who've seen that one Chappelle sketch, remember, birdshot then buckshot. Unless you're dealing with crackheads, then just buckshot. But we are not here. We are not here to talk about unwelcome intruders, or me suffering from a common cold for a bit longer than I had planned, which also meant having to shuffle around the schedule, including a couple interviews that I had planned, which I am grateful for how patient they were with me. Because Lord knows I don't like having to reschedule at the last minute when it comes to other people, and it would be hypocritical for me to give myself a pass when I have to do it. But this is something that I planned for quite a while and accelerated my plans after Steamforged Games decided to not only fuck up, but also with their more recent project, a admission in all but name that they decided to stick to what they know. Because this week's topic is how not to bring Dark Souls to tabletop. If any of you think that that the "not" in parentheses was taken from Rebuild of Evangelion, you should know better, and shame on you for thinking that. I like Ano, but I don't like him that much. Although I can say I like him more than I like Miyazaki. I know that the "anime was a mistake" quote is taken out of context, but even beyond that, he's a bit of a dick.
I mean, half of the auteurs in the anime community are kind of dicks.
Facts.
I mean, half of the auteurs in general. Just look at Hideki Kamiya and the video game side of things.
Yeah. Uh, when it comes to the auteur thing, I think as long as you're able to put out something quality, people are willing to give the dickishness a pass.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you provide classics, it's a case of what have you it's a case of what have you done for me lately? Because James Cameron has produced classics, and yet these days he's a fucking idiot.
People fall off sometimes.
Because seriously, who the hell asked for an Avatar sequel?
No one
I did.
Don't lie to me.
didn't.
Not. I actually wanted one. I'm gonna be an
The qu-
outlier in this group. I'm sorry.
You wanted a sequel to James Cameron's billion-dollar CG movie.
Yeah.
She doesn't even know what movie we're talking about.
Wait, are we talking about the awesome tree and the blue people?
Okay, maybe she does.
It
Uh,
was pretty
and
awesome.
Brian's saying, and some decided that the Grand Canyon would be better up close. Yeah, one of those people was Evil Knievel. Too soon?
How could it be too soon? That's like years ago at this point.
Man, I'm so out of touch. I don't know who that is. Fuck.
You'll learn eventually. Also, Google is your friend. Or
I was
in my
wondering
case,
why my
DuckDuckGo.
friend on Facebook has his name as that. It's a person?
Evil Knievel? Yeah.
Oh.
He was a stunt driver.
Mm-hmm.
We say was for a reason.
Oh, he's dead? Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm pretty sure there's an argument that could be made that he served as the inspiration for Johnny Blaze, aka Ghost Rider.
Ooh,
He might have.
so
At least partly.
cool.
But with that in mind, getting back to the matter at hand. Now, I do want to set a few ground rules when it comes to this. Despite what some people claim, we will not be giving any time to Sekiro for this because Sekiro is not a Souls-like.
As much as people claim it, yeah. It's not a Souls-like. It's way too different.
Way too different. I was making Tenchu comparisons when it was first announced.
And so was FromSoft.
And we also have Word of God on the matter.
Yeah, there was a sponsored set of videos from FromSoft and Activision regarding Sekiro that Zoli the Witch got to make. That was a fun little argument then.
And when it comes to combat, when it comes to advancement, when it comes to your kit, it doesn't have any of that material. The closest thing that it has is the regenerating enemies after hitting a resting spot.
And the fact that once you're dead, you're sent back to a resting spot.
Mm-hmm.
The last one you touched.
Losing
Doesn't
all
Elden
of
Ring
your
do
currency.
That too?
Hmm?
Elden Ring does that too.
Yeah, those are the two elements from Souls-like that Sekiro shares with Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Elden Ring.
Mm-hmm. We're also not going to be focusing on Bloodborne with this because I feel Bloodborne requires its own approach.
Only because of its lore differences, I think.
And Elden Ring, on the other hand, is still on the table. I mean, obviously it makes changes, but I'd say its changes are building upon the foundation that was set with Dark Souls 3.
Yeah.
Like a better improvement of the franchise, making it proven things.
So those two projects I'm putting in a bubble, and I'm moving over to the corner. So everything we say does not reflect on those projects because they're in their bubble.
Yes.
And those of you who've paid attention during the history of the show know this is not the first time I've used that joke.
The bubble joke.
Mm-hmm. Well, I bring it up every time I rip on Fate because I don't want to drag Tiansha down with it.
Yep.
And not that Fate, people. You know which one I'm talking about.
The tabletop Fate, not Fate Nasuverse Fate.
Mm-mm. I for one am not going to bitch at Melty Blood type Lumina because of the free LC characters that were added. When I heard that people were review bombing the game for that, I was like, wait, a couple free characters that look like Fate servants. That's what we're bitching about. Isn't MASH already in the game? Putting aside that the Nasuverse has dipped into respective properties in the past.
I'm pretty sure Nasu is on record by saying they're all connected.
Yeah.
So Tsukihime, Melty Blood, all of that's all in the same universe.
Yeah, and Type Lumina already had MASH in the MASH Kyrlite in the roster.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure one could make an argument that the Nightmare of Wallachia in that game is technically a servant. if only because he doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Or rather, he is built upon the myth of Count Dracula instead of the man himself.
Yes. But I believe this is a bit of rails, Monk.
Yep. So now I will note, I am not pretending like Dark Souls has never dipped into tabletop. There have been plenty of fan projects. One called Dice Souls that was a product of TG that I reviewed quite a while ago. But there's the very well produced one that was done by Rooster Emma, who I'd love to have on the show down the road. There was another indie project called Fires Far Away, which was a somewhat rules light approach that was made by someone who had more passion than common sense, especially since they didn't try and make they made a character sheet the way you'd make a character sheet in Word for an indie game. Nothing wrong with that. It's just something to note. There was a rough draft project called Once Rekindled Embers. There was another project called Project Eclipse. And there was a journaling type project called which is a solo RPG called Rune. And I would love to have the developer of Rune on, but he has me blocked.
For whatever reason.
How dare they?
Yeah.
Rude.
And even beyond that, there have been plenty of people who have done adaptations of Dark Souls within the tabletop space on an unofficial capacity. As well as some system agnostic projects that don't necessarily have the name, but are trying to have that same spirit.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that the people who are doing the Hyperlight Drifter RPG also did something like that. Metal Weave Games is their name. which let me see if I can find. I should be able to find the project that they were doing.
think
Embers of the Forgotten Kingdom.
Okay. I think the biggest point here is that there is quite a lot of variety when it comes to people who have attempted to put Dark Souls into tabletop.
Mm-hmm. However, the only one that had the official one, and this was the one that annoyed me enough to the point where I started making content on this question, is Steamforged Games. Now, I will admit, I ended up having to eat a bit of crow because when it was announced that we were getting that they were doing a tabletop Dark Souls, everybody was like, "Oh God, they're gonna bring it to 5e." And I was like, and at the time, my mindset was, "There's nothing. There's wait and see. There's nothing in it that says that." Now, granted, I could understand why people said that because up until that point, a lot of Steamforged Games had mostly done board games and mini encounters, minis and stuff for 5th edition, but they'd never done a full-on RPG book for 5th edition. The closest that they did was the Epic Encounters series of material, which all that is just a micro module. It's a boss fight module meant that you can slot into any 5e campaign.
Yep.
Is what it is. It's kind of like the old. I'd imagine you could make a comparison between it and the Layer Assault series of organized play back in the D&D 4th edition days. However, when it eventually was brought into 5e, they started doing some previews on it. And in fact, several months ago, Zan and I covered one of these. And I think, it was shortly before we covered it was one of the. Let me see if I can find where. Yeah, it was the second discussing video that we did. The first one was when talking about the most anticipated TTRPGs of 2022, according to EN World.
Yeah, we had a lot to say about them that time.
Yep. But we spent about an hour talking about the mechanics preview that they did, and apparently this attempt that Steamforged Games had of trying to do Dark Souls in 5e, even by people who stand 5e, was not well received. And I can't say we didn't see it coming, because we totally did. Because I believe that there was one particular problem that we had that was still in the book, and it was a case of, why the fuck is this here?
Yeah.
So let's talk once again about position and why that was a terrible idea. So anyone who's played a Souls-like knows that there's 3 meters that you got to deal with: health, stamina, magic.
Depending on the game. Some games didn't have magic, but yes, those 3 are generally it.
For whatever reason, in their infinite wisdom, Steamforged decided to combine health and stamina into position. But maneuvers still take up position.
What the?
Yep.
This was their attempt to replicate the difficult and somewhat unforgiving nature of combat in Souls.
Except those 2 resources should never be combined. You're lost.
Shouldn't it be the magic and the stamina instead?
I mean that would have been more in line with. No, that would have been more in line with what they did in games like Dark Souls 2.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been closer to what was done. But while running out of stamina does often become getting hit, it doesn't always. And in fact, if you're spacing correctly, you can run out of stamina and be spaced long enough to get enough stamina back to take the next move or perform the next assault in Dark Souls games and in Elden Ring.
Brian, as far as the question of system, we'll be getting to that in a minute. I want to lay a foundation first.
Yeah.
The health and the stamina, that just hurts my brain. Why would they do that?
That was the question that I had as well, because this is creating a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Trying to create
Or it doesn't need to be there in the first place.
Yeah, you're creating solutions to problems you don't have.
Yeah.
Especially since I'm no stranger to games that have health as the resource for actions. Hell, the Cypher system kind of does that with effort regarding Numenera.
Mm-hmm.
Except here's the thing. With Numenera, you have 3 pools that you're dipping into.
Yeah.
For one, for two, the main reason you're going to be dipping into those pools is either for an ability or for effort. And if you've got an edge in certain
an
ones, you're going to
action
be
or something.
Yeah, it's more spending effort is done to make dice rolls easier.
Usually it's like magic and health, because like some magic hurts you in order to do it. It's like a blood magic or some shit. But stamina? I can't understand. Why would they do that to themselves? It's like they're setting themselves up for failure.
In a lot of the Souls games, stamina is consumed with things like rolls and later on certain abilities.
Yeah, but why with the health?
Again, the argument that Steamforged made at the time was to reflect the brutal difficulty reputation that the Souls games have, but in my not so humble opinion, it is far more difficult, pun not intended, to reflect that sort of brutal difficulty in tabletop. And if someone asked me how I would do it, the answer that I would give is I wouldn't. There's way too many parts when it comes to difficulty, and the way that it's expressed in tabletop games is not the way you can express it in video games.
You gotta think outside the box and make it a different type of logic.
Mm-hmm. Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay can be infamously difficult, but that's largely because of the low wound rating and the difficulty when it comes to healing. To the point where you can only get the effects of a healing draft once per day.
Mm-hmm.
There's also the fact that you're probably not going to be playing a character that's optimized due to how the career system works.
Optimization doesn't happen until your level's in.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to seek out your optimization yourself. Most players don't. Most players experiment. And while it may not be the most effective build, it is still a build that gets them to the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe to fix it, maybe they put the health and the stamina like as a setting you could do. It's not a game, like a video game. It's like a it hurts my brain. Doesn't make any sense.
Jeremy, I understand where you're coming from with that, but I think the reason Steamforged used 5e is just because that's what they knew.
It's also what's What's most ubiquitous? It's the same reason why Mark Reinhagen said that they used 5e as a base for parts of Lost Orn games.
Although at the very least, I will credit if Reinhagen's upcoming Badlander was just using 5e straight, I wouldn't have invited you on to talk with him about it,
Yeah,
and I wouldn't have given it as much time of day as I did.
yeah. Even if you are, actually part of Lost Orn Games Media Division.
Yeah, but which has to be mentioned in the interest of full disclosure.
Mm-hmm. But with the Lost Orn games, they used 5e as a base simply due to, well, the popularity of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that that's a brutal business decision, but
Yeah.
Making money is part of a business.
But at the very least, they're not slavishly using 5e.
Yeah, just as the base template, basically.
Mm-hmm. There are plenty of and I should note that high lethality can be a way to reflect difficulty, but it's not the only way. You can use escalating danger. That's what Shiver does, for just as one example.
Technically, you could even say 13th Age does it with the escalation die.
Yes. The point is that this position approach was the wrong thing to do. The second wrong thing that they did was introducing classes.
Oh no.
Like, there's quote unquote technically a class system in Dark Souls, but they're not classes, they're starting kits, and then you choose to grow from there.
Chainlink mentions Dark Souls using Shadow of the Demon Lord. Tone-wise, Shadow of the Demon Lord is a natural fit. Mechanics-wise, not so much, because it's still using a class system. Even if it's a class system that personally I find more interesting than a straight up single class setup, because you're mixing and matching as you level. But it is still utilizing a class system.
Mm-hmm.
And again, one could argue that you have a class system at character creation in any of the Souls likes, but in actuality, you don't. What you have is a starting package.
Starting kit thing.
Yeah.
You have a starting package that has your base set of stats, your equipment, and maybe some knickknacks depending on the game. Or you could go the full freeform route if you're really crazy. But trying to implement a class system ends up taking away some of the freeformness, because I'd say one of the big appeals of the Souls games that a lot of people overlook when they discuss it is personalization. And Brian is saying that class doesn't fit well for single player genres. I disagree with that.
This isn't about an entire genre. This is about a game style specifically. The Soulsborne game style, while some people call it a genre, the genre is technically character action or character action RPG, depending on how far you want to go with your genre tags.
Mm-hmm.
The system within Dark Souls and the Soulsborne series specifically uses the word class, or however you'd like to use it, to represent how you start the game. There's no guarantee that you're going to end the game in that specific layout, even in the end.
And even if jokes are made about strike builds, dex builds, or magic or miracles builds, there's still a wide net in those individually.
Mm-hmm.
Creativity and personal touch, depending on the person.
And there's plenty of content creators that have whole swaths of videos talking about certain builds that they've done. Some of them more viable than others. Some of them are done just to fuck around.
Fuck around and find out.
Much
Makes the
much
game
like
more character and makes you feel like you can go down your own path, even though, you know, like your friend and you are playing the same game, but like single player. You have the same stuff, but you can do your own playstyle anyways. It's pretty good.
pretty much. And I'd say you see this even more so within Elden Ring, and that's not even getting into some of the crazy mods that people have made. Including some people who decided to make the game a bit more anime by bringing in I remember VSlayer sharing a video of someone who integrated Roronoa Zoro using the model from One Piece Burning Blood, and of course, given the inspirations, it didn't take long before somebody integrated Guts. In fact, I think they've done that. I think Guts has been integrated in one form or another in all of them.
That doesn't surprise me.
With I'd say the peak being Elden Ring, where they reskinned I think they reskinned Mogo to act like Berserker Armor Guts. Or rather, I should say Guts under the sway of the Beast of Darkness. Since Miyazaki has gone on the record on multiple occasions that Berserk was one of his major influences with Dark Souls.
Mm-hmm.
And it isn't the sole influence, but it is one of them. And we went into that when we did our tribute to Miura, God rest his soul.
Yes,
That
rest
man.
in peace.
I still miss him.
Mm-hmm. But the point is that trying to force a class system from a classless game. If you want to do the starting package, that can be done, and I have seen people hack D&D to go classless. But here's the problem, and this is why people who say, well, just use AD&D or just use BX. No, because there is so much shit that you're gonna have to hit the nuke for. This is not an issue that's just tied to 5e. The fact of the matter is that the D20 system itself has too many things that would be incompatible to the point where you'd have to make it a whole other game. Because classes, that's got to go. For reasons I've already mentioned.
And that's just one thing.
Yeah. The magic system, the Vancian model, the whole spells per day bullshit. That's got to go. I know some people might say that you can do the same thing with attunement slots, but not really, because attunement slots are slots. And the amount of attunement slots you have is determined by your catalyst, not by the player itself, or a choice of class.
Yep. Not to mention the fact that even with the few games that don't have a mana bar and use charges, That's not per day. That's up until you get to the next bonfire.
Mhm.
And then it refills.
And no, reskinning it as per scene isn't going to help. That's putting
Yeah.
a bandage on it. Um, and I'd say a lot of the way weapons work would have to be reskinned, because weapons don't scale well in any version of D&D. That's been a pet peeve of mine for years.
Mm.
Whereas weapons are expected to scale. Granted, they scale at differing degrees, depending on the individual stats of that weapon, and depending on whether or not you've paid somebody to upgrade a weapon, which is another issue. And this is an even bigger issue if you want to bring the concept if you want to ask and answer the question about weapon arts that were introduced in Dark Souls 3, or the ashes that were in Elden Ring.
The Ashes of War.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. And we lost her.
That happens sometimes. She'll be back in.
Mm-hmm. But with all of that stuff that you have to heavily change or just nuke outright, we end up coming to one of our favorite welcome back, Starlight. One of our mantras when it comes to design. House ruling and home brewing should be a spice, not the main dish.
Yep. You should always be imposing your house rules as a way to modify the main thing, not making it the main thing.
Mm-hmm. And Brian is saying I should. As far as Mayor of Noobtown, put a link in Tabletop, and I'll take a look later on. But the reason why I bring all of that up is because some people had this mindset of, well, what if you used an earlier version? What if you used an earlier edition of D&D, or used a OSR game? Wouldn't those be easier? No, because you'd have a lot of these same problems. And let's look at previous editions and whether or not they'd work. 4th edition, the best edition. I know some of you want me to say 3.5, especially if you're Shad fans, but I'm not getting paid.
The checks didn't clear. They all bounced.
So, fuck you, pay me. But
I think even with 4th edition, you still have the issues.
you still have the issue of classes. You have the issue of powers.
Yep.
You'd have the issue of a granular level-based advancement. You do technically have levels in Souls, but not in the same way.
Yeah.
Your level is just the culmination of how many core stat level ups you've done over the course of your adventure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's more like I'd say it's more like insight rank in L5R, and that, if you catch my drift.
Mm-hmm.
3rd edition / Pathfinder.
I can just imagine everything that would go wrong with it.
Let's see. Skill system out. We already mentioned we still have the problem with we have the problem with spell casting. That's out. All of the feat traps and just feat design in general, that's out. And I already mentioned how, of course, there's also the fact that the the spell lists would have to be heavily modified because you don't have the 9 spheres.
Mm-hmm.
I think at most you've had I want to say 3 types of magic.
I think so.
There's there there it's no 4. There was dark magic, i.e., magic from the dark soul of man. Arcane, miracles, pyromancy.
Hmm.
There might be 1 or 2 that I'm missing, but that's the general gist of things. And in Elden Ring, you only really had 2 types.
Sorceries and incantations. One
Yep.
used intelligence, the other uses faith.
Mhm.
Well,
Yep.
technically there's the blood magic, which uses arcane, but that's like 3.
Mhm. But regardless, that means that, and even with that, the way spells have levels in every version of D&D doesn't quite fit. I mean, you tend to, with a lot of these spells in Dark Souls, you tend to have a singular effect, and it's a fire and forget thing. There aren't multiple levels of it. Now, granted, in some cases you can have multiple spells that are way too similar. Looking right at you, Soul Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
Do I really need half a dozen different variants of Soul Arrow?
No.
That's why I like what Inferno Plus did with it. At the very least, the Soul Arrow variants that he did all feel different. And some of them literally are different because they're either multi-shots, beams, or delayed multi-shots. Plus, there's a lot of things that 3.5 and Pathfinder do that I'm not a fan of. Period. That would certainly not work. Even Pathfinder 2nd Edition would largely have the same problems that you see with D&D 4th. In this regard, it's just that its problems are a result of its feat system. Although I will admit I do like the action economy in Pathfinder 2nd, but that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
AD&D 2nd. Do we really want to go back to Thaco? I don't.
Nobody likes Thaco. Not even the Grogs, as much as they might say they do.
I don't feel like going back to Thaco, and I especially don't feel like going back to having half a dozen saving throws. Especially having a saving throw just for breath attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations, you have a saving throw that, depending on the campaign, you may never use. And once again, we have the issue of classes, and we also have the issue of the spell list, and we have the issue of martial characters being so fucking useless.
Which is definitely not Dark Souls. Martial characters are extremely useful.
And that whole argument of fighters aren't supposed to be powerful, you can't use that you can barely use that argument in most cases.
And Porkchop just said, Dark Souls, Dark Heresy, or Palladian system?
First off, Dark Heresy has a career path system. So Granted, one that's a little more freeform than some outright class systems we mentioned earlier, but it's still the choice of career is still somewhat of a class. It's just a class with more width.
Yep.
And Palladium,
Sticker.
fuck you. Just fuck you. I have done my fucking time with Rifts. I'm not going back. And going before and stuff like BX or BECME, no matter which edition you go with, you end up having the same problems that you have to address and possibly nuke. A underdeveloped martial system, an incompatible magic system, trying to force classes into a classless gate from a classless source material, and a bottlenecked form of personalization.
I'm gonna throw you a curveball, Monk. Anima.
If you heavily house rule a bunch of shit, put a very tight leash on things, Anima could work. But the more that I think about it, the more my mind keeps saying, just use Against the Dark Master.
Against the Dark Master. You know, I could have gone even further out with that, though, Monk, and I could have said, what about Sword World?
Actually, Sword World would be relatively easy to work with. And what a coincidence you saying that since earlier today, we finally have a fan translation for the 3 core rulebooks for Sword World 2.5.
I don't think it's
the
coincidence since
convenience.
you told me.
Oh my gosh.
Since you told me about it, so
Mm-hmm.
The
It's just
coincidence. Oh no. It's not like he did that on purpose.
But the big reason that I say that Sword World would be easier to work with, is its class system.
which isn't really a class system.
No, it isn't.
In
You
fact,
are
it's almost like the type of system we already talked about with how classes work in Dark Souls.
The closest thing you have to a starting package is the backgrounds from the races, which
Yep.
which are just going to determine your starting attributes, as well as how much experience you have to spend on classes.
Mm-hmm.
Your adventurer level is just whatever your highest class level is.
Which is pretty close. Not exactly the same as levels in Dark Souls. Is still pretty close.
Mm-hmm. And individual classes are bought with experience, not leveled up with experience.
Which, again, stats are bought with experience in Dark Souls. You can really think of souls as a currency for everything, not just as a currency for some things.
Mm-hmm.
Porkchop asks, "Are we going White Wolf with this? I hope not." I think that it would be apropos to mention that there was a Dark Souls game created that used dice pools for stamina, but that's not exactly the same as going full White Wolf. Dice pools are a common enough feature elsewhere to not be something you would consider only with one type of system.
And Sword World only uses 2d6.
Yeah.
Like that is literally the only die that it uses. You're either going to use 1d6 or 2d6, because something to keep in mind is in Japan, for the longest time, it was hard to get a hold of of a lot of types of polyhedral die, except for D6s. Obviously, you can get because there's plenty of people who are playing some sort of gambling game anywhere you look.
Yeah, cube dice are common the world round, in fact. So
So a lot of early TTRPGs in Japan did that. Now, as far as how even with that Call of Cthulhu ended up getting popular, well, that's already been explained to me, but it is kind of amusing because Call of Cthulhu uses basic role-playing system, which is a roll under D100 approach. Of course, there could just as well be a hack that used D6 that I don't know about. I kind of doubt it though.
Yeah, I kind
you're
of doubt
pretty
it too.
knowledgeable.
It's less of knowledge and more of probability, especially since a lot of the reason why Call of Cthulhu got popular is the replay scene, replays. Replays are kind of a precursor to actual plays, in the sense that they were a written retelling of somebody's campaign. The most popular example of this is Record of Lodoss War. That was originally a replay that was published in Comptique magazine in Japan. Eventually it morphed into a novel, and that novel would morph into different anime and manga.
Yep.
And most recently in video games with Deedlit and Wonder Labyrinth.
And this is actually a more common thing than people give it credit for. After all, I'm actually not sure how many people have read the Goblin Slayer light novel, but in the very first light novel, as part of the author's afterword, he explains that it was from his college D&D games.
Yeah. Similar thing happened with Slayers. I'm not sure.
Slayers.
I'm not sure if the same thing happened with Orphan. I kind of doubt it.
No, I think Orphan was a thing first, and then somebody started playing TTRPGs with it at some point. But
possibly because Orphan doesn't feel like a D&D campaign at all. Even though I've used it as part of a running joke, in the sense that, because a lot of people like to make the joke of Slayers being anime D&D, which is technically correct, but I don't think it encompasses the whole picture. The approach I take is Slayers is your D&D campaigns when you're in high school. Orphan is your D&D campaigns when you're in college. Record of Lodoss War is your D&D campaigns when you're out of college and romanticizing your high school campaigns. And Sorcerer Hunters is your D&D campaigns if your table is full of idiots.
I
I don't like Sorcerer Hunters. It's shit. Now, Brian brings up the 2D20 system with Conan, but I'm maybe if you would have to significantly overhaul the talent system if you're using any of the 2D20 games. The problem with using any of the 2D20 games is that there still is not a universal document for them. One that could be used to hack it into other settings. Brian saying as Konosuba is my D&D games.
Konosuba has its own system.
Yeah. And I had to call out the person who runs one of Katakawa's Twitter accounts when they couldn't get when they fucked up on their facts because
They
they
said it
tried
was the
they tried to claim that the Konosuba TTRPG is the first Japanese tabletop to get translated.
ignoring things like Tenra Bansho and even earlier things.
The first one is made in 2008.
Yep.
And I had remarked it's kind of rich to say that when Picaresque Roman had just come out 3 months beforehand.
Yep.
Like I'm pretty sure.
That's why you gotta do your research.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was an English member of the Katakawa media team, someone over here in the U.S.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure I could hear Seigi going, "Am I a joke to you?" Seigi's the guy behind Picaresque Roman, and most recently he developed Convictor Drive, which is in the process of getting its translation.
Yep.
But Tenra's been around for years. Shinobi Gami's been around for years. There's been fan translations of the Log Horizon TRPG.
Which that always made me tickled because Log Horizon is a fantastic book and a fantastic anime, and having its own TTRPG just feels good.
Mm-hmm.
But like you pointed
hell
out,
yeah.
the very first one made. I still have that as a recommended purchase over on Amazon.
You want to know something funny when it comes to the recommended purchases? For even after the line had shut down, I kept getting the recommended purchase of Marvel Heroic Roleplaying's Annihilation expansion, even though the physical book was canceled. Now,
Well, I mean, the recommendations are AI driven, so I can understand why they'd get shit wrong.
well, for whatever reason, somebody didn't take down the Annihilation page on Amazon.
Also stupid.
The PDF did come out. It was out for a hot minute before the rug got pulled from under everybody, including me. Because you'll remember I spoke very highly about Marvel Heroic.
Yes. I remember. I remember very clearly.
Mm-hmm. And it didn't take long before somebody took Cortex Prime and hacked it into to do some of the stuff that was in Marvel Heroic. Since Cortex Prime is similar to what was in Marvel Heroic, but not quite. And obviously, it's legally distinct. But even with all that, Brian brings up Shadowrun. No. No.
I don't think Shadowrun could really support Dark Souls.
If you want to blow up a lot of shit, maybe, but that would include you would have to blow up the entire magic system.
Yep.
The spellcasting system, get rid of every metahuman type.
Yep.
And get rid of about 90% of the skill list.
Not to mention the fact you'd have to get rid of anything having to do with the tech side.
Yep. No. You'd also have to get rid of the astral rules.
So you're blowing up about 75% of the game.
Mm-hmm. Once again, you have the issue of when you have to change that much, is it really worth it?
I can't.
Someone else then
just make a
counters
new
with
one based on
Cyberpunk hack for
what's up to make
Soulsborne.
Absolutely not.
Now you guys are just throwing shit at the wall to see what sticks. Admit it.
it.
Yeah. Now, if someone wanted to use Savage Worlds, maybe, but one major problem that you end up dealing with is the introduction of whether it's feats, talents, advantage disadvantage systems, or similar abilities. A lot of those can potentially be present, but a lot of your customization is locked to your equipment. And a lot of that granularity isn't really present when you level up. Now, granted, this is why this would be the one tricky thing with Sword World, but I still say that Sword World could work because of the fact that all that classes are a series of stat packages. But here's the bigger reason why I argue it would work, that Sword World 2.0 would work. I haven't had enough time to delve into 2.5.
Mhm.
Is even the casting classes. You get taking a level gives you a bonus to your casting rolls and the level appropriate spells. But here's the catch. You need to have the class's appropriate catalyst equipped, and you need MP in order to cast those spells. Taking the first level in say Magitech.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to give you all the first level Magitech spells, which doesn't amount to much. You're only getting 4 spells total.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't have a Magisphere, you don't get to cast.
So then Chainlink says Iron Sworn, not sarcastic.
I haven't had
And
enough time with Ironsworn, but I feel like it would have its own baggage that you'd have to deal with.
And then Pork Chop, being a dick, says Gumshoe, very sarcastic.
Fuck you. Gumshoe and its derivatives are meant for investigative campaigns. Kenneth Haidt was very clear about that. That was the sole reason he made Gumshoe, was because he was dissatisfied with how so many games handled investigation. And remember, sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. Now, I do think, oddly enough, one entry that I think could work, but you'd have to do some finagling, would be Genesis. That is, of course, Genesis spelled with a Y.
Pork Chop? No, that is a bad pun.
Oh no, what did he say?
We understand that Gumshoe has souls, you dick.
Shame.
Shame this man.
Mm-hmm. But the now, yes, the early version of the Genesis system was the one that was present in the Star Wars trilogy by Fantasy Flight Games. Oh, by Fantasy Flight Games at the time. Nowadays by Edge Entertainment, because Asmodee decided to hoist off all of the RPG stuff to a revamped Edge Entertainment and have FFG focus solely on board and card games.
Yep. It was a sad day.
Brian is saying that Genesis isn't really great for it. I disagree. Largely because of the fact that you have a physical and mental resource that can be built around, and while you do have a skill system, because of you have the fact that skill system is intrinsically built into how things work. It is a bit of a stretch, admittedly, but because of the fact that it doesn't have a spell list but has a build a spell system, you could easily build the spell list from the Souls games.
Yep.
I don't think you need to integrate the Rune Wars setting. And I think what you're thinking of when it comes to Rune Wars is Terranoth. You don't need anything. You wouldn't need anything from that. You would just need the core material and maybe a couple splat books. In order to do so in Genesis. The big reason why I say Genesis would be easier to work with is, for one, even though you technically have careers are a starting package, for one. For two, it utilizes a kind of pyramid system when it comes to its edges, which are basically its feats, where they're of multiple levels, but you have to have a certain amount of the previous levels in order to have higher level ones. I'd say this pyramid system is kind of like the chi advancement systems that were used in Legends of the Wulin, where you had different tiers, but you had to advance them like a pyramid. You had to have at least 2 of the lower level before you could get to the higher level stuff.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm not saying it would be a perfect fit, and I'd certainly have to do some extensive house ruling, but not as extensive as in other games. And Genesis already has a way to reflect its reflect difficulty in that it has a D100 wound system.
Yeah.
Now, Souls doesn't have a wound system per se, but it certainly has a hell of a lot of status effects you can work with. And I know some of the GURPS and hero stands will say just use that. You can use GURPS for anything. I'm not breaking out my TI-83. just so I can get a sailboat.
You can use GURPS for anything, and that's the problem.
Yeah, and anybody who whines to me about too much math in D&D, I will take out my copy of the character creation book for Hero System 6th edition and beat you with it.
Ooh, kinky.
It's 600 pages long.
It is 600 pages long, this is true.
Means it's firm and heavy.
Star, put your motherfucking head back down.
Sorry, sir.
But the reason why I say absolutely not when it comes to Palladium is Palladium has way too many problems on its own that I'd have to deal with before I'd even do any sort of adaptation. Every time I played Rifts or Palladium Fantasy or Heroes Unlimited, which is the worst superhero game I've ever played, I had to house rule the shit out of it. It is the reason, and I especially had to set up my own table of contents because the table of contents in every Palladium book I've ever had is full of lies. Lies!
Lies, damned lies, and statistics.
And you know how we talked about the class problem? Well, you have the different types of character class in Palladium. So you'd have the exact same problem.
It's an issue, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Which, incidentally, is also the reason I said fuck off when it comes to using Cyberpunk, because even though Cyberpunk 2020, because Cyberpunk still has roles, and even though some people might say that those roles aren't classes, they still are.
Yeah, being a rocker boy will absolutely
Just using another
defi-
word.
will absolutely define your character just as much as being media or being, any of the other particular classes.
We have this. There's the same thing exists in Shadowrun. If you want to be extremely technical on the matter, Shadowrun does not have classes, but it still has archetypes that you're going to be expected to follow. Like if you're gonna have somebody who's playing the hacker. You're gonna have somebody who's playing the rigger. You're gonna have somebody who's playing the mage. You're gonna have somebody who's playing the face man.
You're going to have somebody who's playing the muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Most often it's a street Sam.
Most often it's a street Sam. Sometimes it's an adept, and sometimes you get that one idiot who thinks playing the techromancer is a good idea.
Tech romancer.
I.e., what if we had a hacker who hacks without a deck?
What if we had a hacker who does ooga booga magic shit to hack? I think you meant to say.
Yeah. And nobody who runs Shadowrun that I know uses them. In fact, one could say that they're the Shadowrun equivalent of Eggplant.
Because nobody likes Eggplant.
Mm-hmm. And as far as any game that use the storyteller system or story path system, no. Those technically have archetypes, but the problem is every single one of them is too married to their particular setting.
I mean, except for maybe mage, but nobody wants to deal with mage.
Ascension or Awakening?
Which do you think I'm talking about, Monk?
Which is, admittedly, that's the equivalent of asking, would you rather be punched in the balls or kicked in the balls?
I'm going to say
Aren't they equally painful for you guys?
Well, the point is, no matter what happens, you're going to be on the floor in pain. So
yeah.
it's a trick question, Starlight.
Oh, it's rhetorical? I got you.
If I need to use something that's more inclusive, would you rather get crapped on by a pigeon or a blue jay?
They're the same.
Exactly.
That's the point. Hold on.
Okay.
That's the joke.
Mm-hmm.
Where's your answer, Monk?
You suck, McBain!
There we go.
But he's asking, would I alter to allow for a team of the Holy Trinity? I'm not entirely sure what you mean by that, so I can't really comment.
Maybe he means the holy trinity of most MMOs: deep attack, tank, and heals. I don't know if he is. That's my assumption from that terminology, though.
If he is, that's a case of that would be a player issue, not a designer issue.
Or maybe he means the trinity of a warrior, rogue, mage.
Are you familiar with Warrior Rogue Mage, the free RPG? Also known as the Worm system.
I'm aware of it, but I watch your reviews.
That one actually could work. The reason for that is Warrior, it technically speaking doesn't have classes. Warrior, Rogue, and Mage are your 3 core ability scores in that game.
Nice.
You use your Warrior modifier for combat checks, your Rogue one for skill checks, and your Mage ones for, well, spell casting. There's a few things that you would have to tweak around with, but overall it would be possible to do it. In fact, because of how light the game is, I'd say it would be relatively easier to utilize. Plus, as I mentioned before, it's free.
Free is good.
I know that Brian had said werewolf not even once. I might
Werewolf
want to
is
be
nothing compared to mage.
I might be a smartass and use werewolf for Bloodborne, but nah. Plus, I don't want to deal with any goddamn hippies that play werewolf. Yeah,
It's weird how often hippies play werewolf.
Werewolf.
Because technically the werewolves in the game are tied to Gaia and her status, so it's kind of the werewolves are kind of hippie-ish to begin with.
That's funny.
even though most of the portrayals of the Garo have come in their human forms look more like bikers than they do hippies.
They're enviro-terrorists, eco-terrorists, Monk.
Yeah.
So worm it is, says Porkchop.
Like I said, relatively easy. Heroes and hardships, I do think could work because of how if you look at the way advancement works, you're in most of the Souls games, you're leveling one of the core attributes.
Yeah.
And there's a bunch of cascading effects that you get from leveling those up.
Attribute goes up, so does a bunch of other derived stats, which is essentially how a lot of video games work.
With heroes and hardships, when it comes to character creation, you have a similar kind of cascading effect. Where what ends up happening is your core attributes determine how many points you can spend on skills and on benefits.
Yep.
Each of them essentially having separate pools. And it's because of that it could potentially work. I'm putting a big asterisk on that because it's technically not out yet.
Mm-hmm.
And in the interest of full disclosure, Jason from Earl of Fife has been on the show.
Remember, people, Monk takes his ethical responsibilities very seriously. This is why he tells you who he's interviewed.
Mm-hmm. Even if one could argue that it's redundant because of how many people I've interviewed, I still feel I should say it.
It is the mark of someone who could actually be called a journalist, rather than the epithet of journalist these days.
I'm a better journalist than anybody at IGN. Low bar.
IGN, Kotaku, any of the gaming sphere. Yeah, low bar, true, but the fact that it is a low bar is what's sad, and the fact that you can exceed that low bar with very little effort is even sadder.
And no degree.
Degrees are somewhat overrated. I'll leave it at that.
Indubitably.
Indubitably, yes.
Or I should say no. The closest thing I have to a journalism background is doing underground newspapers because I got thrown off of the official ones. In some of the schools that I was in.
Mm.
And although the fake elevator coupon was funny to do, as well as the time that I printed a whole issue in it wasn't in mirror writing, it was in wingdings.
Wingdings. Beware the man who speaks in hands.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Undertale. I got the reference. See, I'm not that bad.
You're not that bad,
Oh.
but you still have a ways to go.
Yeah. I'm willing to learn though.
Which is the most important part.
hmm
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the big reason why most universalist games I am extremely hesitant about using would be the fact that with universalist games you have a whole different set of problems that you have to account for.
Yeah, there's an entire cannery of worms
Yeah.
there, not just a can.
And Brian, for what it's worth, I would not use any World of Darkness game, be it old or new, and adapt that into Souls. The big reason for that is all of them are far too married to the setting of the modern knights.
Mm-hmm. It's very much modern Earth with a dark underbelly twist.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really pull that stuff into Dark Souls.
There's also the fact that the big claim to fame with White Wolf's products was the use of factions within their settings.
Mm-hmm. Which, granted, the use of factions within their settings could support the Covenant system, but that's one good thing for all the shit you'd have to deal with.
Well, that, and you would have to you'd still have to nuke the factions from out of the gate, and some of those factions play your choice of which plays a major role in character creation and even advancement.
Yep.
There's
Never pick Premier, people. Not if you want to be free.
There's usually some sort of exclusive ability. It usually plays a factor in your starting package, and it usually plays a factor in certain abilities that are exclusive to that faction.
And even into your Great Curse.
Mm-hmm.
If you're playing, well, anything but Hunter.
And even the only Hunter might work for Bloodborne, but
well, I mean, it's very clear Bloodborne has some inspiration from Hunter.
But we already decided that Bloodborne requires its own approach. We may do in the future, and that's why we put it in the bubble.
Yes, it is in the bubble. Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, fire burning, and cauldron bubble.
Someone once suggested Ars Magica as something that could work. No. And the large reason for that is Ars Magica is deeply tied into its setting, that being a alternate medieval Europe. And there's the fact that, as the name implies, it's going to spend a lot of time with magic.
I mean, I would assume as much from a game called Ars Magica.
Mm-hmm. Now,
somebody just asked, does the Goblin Slayer TRPG use the same system as Sword World?
A significantly modified version of Sword World, but yes. Which is why I was so annoyed when people were saying that Goblin Slayer should just use D&D because of its origins in being a D&D campaign. If Goblin Slayer was made anywhere else in the world, I might be willing to go with that. But as I've mentioned many times, Sword World is the big dog in Japan.
Yeah. If you want to make the comparison, you could even say Sword World is Japan's most ubiquitous TRPG.
Honestly, yeah. Especially since in the early days it was one of the many games that was published by Kadokawa. I think it still is published by Kadokawa.
I could check that.
For the longest time, Kadokawa had a TTRPG branch called Group SNE.
Mm-hmm.
they were, and Chainlink says it's like Sword World upgraded. No, Sword World upgraded is 2.5. Goblin Slayer is a side grade, one that doesn't have as much versatility as Sword World. But to be fair, Sword World has a bunch of splat books to back it up, including some significant overhauls of some of the rule set. Chief among them being how midway through its run, midway through 2.0's run, it was, I can't remember the exact name of the book, but one of them was Ignis Blaze, which vastly messed with a lot of the weapon system. But there was also an arcane book that introduced an alternative approach, a more advanced approach to all of the magic systems, including introducing high magic, which is the only kind of magic you can't get from a specific class.
So, Monk, did we already mention that Group SNE did a Dark Souls TRPG?
I think we did, but that one is not that one hasn't gotten a fan translation to my knowledge. And
not that I know of, but I would like to say that Group SNE has done a Dark Souls TRPG back in 2017.
Mm-hmm. From what I've heard from some of the people who have looked at it, it's not very good.
That's kind of sad.
That's what they say, but then again, everybody keeps telling me that that Shadowrun 6th edition was a betrayal of Shadowrun, and I don't see it that way.
And yeah, Sword World Group SNE is still active, so yes, Sword World is still a Kadokawa production.
Yeah. I first found out about the term Group SNE when I learned about the Japanese translations of Shadowrun and Earth Dawn, largely because both of them were under FASA, who they were working with at the time. And one would think that all that it is just taking the original FASA books and just translating them into Japanese. That's not exactly what happened. The Shadowrun, the Japanese Shadowrun has a whole separate setting that is more reflective of the way the cyberpunk scene looked in the 80s and 90s, from a lot of different anime.
That's because it was Mega CD.
Well, yeah, the Shadowrun video game was the last Mega CD game to ever come out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, come out officially. There's been plenty of people who've been doing homebrew games in the years since, but you can find homebrew games for any past generation console these days.
I find it really funny that the Shadowrun game for Mega CD was made by Compile, Compa-Heart's predecessor. So for all of you who love the Neptunia games, there's a Shadowrun game from the Sega CD. You should go get it.
I mean, I still prefer the Genesis and SNES game, but that's because the Shadowrun one feels like a point and click adventure, and I'm not the biggest fan of point and click adventures.
We've played too much King's Quest.
Yeah, King's Quest is my whipping boy because of the hand braking that goes on, or Guide Dammit, or Moon Logic.
Did you
games are awesome.
Did you eat that cake from the beginning of the game, Monk? Oh, well, now you can't get past the Yeti, which is like 5/6 of the way into the game.
Yeah. This is why King's Quest is our whipping boy. But the but the other thing, when it came to the Japanese Earth Dawn, that was where things got real interesting, because the all of the art was significantly changed or just redone, and one of the artists involved in it is somebody who is a concept art legend when it comes to a lot of tokusatsu. Because he's the same guy who did he's done the monster designs for for the vast majority of Super Sentai in the 90s. He did the monster design for Kamen Rider Zeto and Mechanical Violator Hokkaido, and a little series we talked about in the early days called Garo.
We love Garo.
Yeah. He's done, and that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the stuff he's done. It was considered a big damn deal when he stepped onto the Garo project.
Yep.
I believe he also had a hand in some of the monster designs in Kamen Rider Den-O. I'll have to double check later, but the point is he's been around.
Yeah. I think we're a bit on a tangent here, though.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
Rails.
Now, when it comes, the funny thing about Steamforged games, and the reason why I don't completely write them off, is the Dark Souls and Elden Ring board games that they've done. Or at least the Dark Souls board game. The Elden Ring one isn't out yet. Is actually pretty good. Like, Steamforged games are not scrubs. They have
in their own wheelhouse.
Yeah. In fact, when I saw that they announced that they were doing an Elden Ring board game, I think my first remark was, "Oh, they're finally stepping back into their lane."
Yeah.
I think it was a tacit admission that them handling the RPGs was a bad idea. I'd argue that it could have worked if they brought in people who were willing to break the system.
Yeah, I think if Steamforged Games was willing to bring in people that knew more about TRPGs, first of all, and then also bring in people who would smash the system around so they could see what does and does not work, they could have done really well. Because they're not bad at game design in general. It's just that tabletop RPGs are not a game a game type they have designed for with any amount of certainty or expertise behind it. It's not something that's been in their wheelhouse before. But they definitely could have learned how to do it.
Mm-hmm. I know I brought up that they've done the Epic Encounters series, but it's not hard to do a module.
Mm-hmm. They're not designing a whole system. They're just designing something that works within a system that's already established.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, there may be some tweaks, some additions, but it's not like they have to design everything from the ground up, or even try to design in a system they're familiar with. Because, like we said, it was a 5e design, but even though it was 5e, they still wanted to try and get something unique to it, being, Dark Souls, and they didn't really do that well. And that could have that's just got to be something that they're going to have to test for and prepare and things of that nature. And maybe they'll come back to it in the future. Maybe they'll come back to TTRPGs in the future, and they'll come back with a little more caution and much more freedom to experiment and have people come in and break stuff so that they know what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, because as tempting as it would be to say that it was doomed just from using 5e, we can't really take that route, because we have seen people, and we've even had people on this channel, who have massively hacked up 5th edition, played with its insides, and rebuilt it into what they needed.
The one that I always chill is Heavens and Heresies. Play Heavens and Heresies, you Philistines.
Mm-hmm. But another big example of this kind of thing is Magi Knights.
Yep.
which we've done a deep dive in the past. I've had its creators Derek and Kira on the show, and even offered to help contribute with the when I sent in my outline for the Magi Knight Revenant.
Yep. Full disclosure, Brother Tanner, who is the sole creator of Heavens and Heresies, and Derek and Kira are actually close personal friends. We like them. They're good people, and they like us.
Mm-hmm. I may cringe at the I may have cringed at the elven mullet, but
hey, that was glorious, and you know it.
Yeah.
Tanner pulls that shit off like magic.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, he had to kill it off because of the fact that his Twitter account is part of his teaching thing.
Yep.
Which is I'm not sure if he actually cut off the mullet, but he had to get rid of the images he was using.
Because it's him in shorts and no shirt.
Mm-hmm.
Shirtless teacher is not exactly conducive to schooling.
Yeah.
Wonder if that got him a few fangirls in his classes, though.
Yeah,
being a happily married man, that wouldn't affect him.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck?
Is he fit or something?
Yeah.
Super.
Comment.
Dude is super fit.
Super fit and does a lot of stuff with his branch of CSA and has had better luck with the CSA than
SCA.
Right? Yeah, SCA. SCA than Zan has.
Yeah, his SCA is much more.
What is SCA?
The Society for Creative Anachronisms.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
I
don't know what that means.
I can tell you after the show because it's pretty detailed.
Okay.
Yeah. Since we've tackled a lot of the knots, I think we should shift into the things that should be done, and and afterwards I will make clear why a lot of the people who have taken a stab at doing tabletop Dark Souls just go with an in-house system instead of adapting an existing one.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the core pillars have to be classless cascading design.
Okay.
Emphasis on equipment in terms of customization, rather than special abilities.
Yeah.
I would say a bit more of a freeform design rather than building around at best broad archetypes.
Yep. A high emphasis on risk versus reward gameplay.
I would say that is certainly the case as well. When it comes to monsters and bosses, I know some people would say that you need to make them exceptionally difficult or something like that, but difficulty is something that should be in the hands of the GM, not the designer per se.
Yeah. As the designers, we give the GMs the tools to make things as difficult or as easy as they'd like.
Mm-hmm. And even though some games are more unforgiving than others, that's because of the design that they have in mind. But the GM still has ample amount of control to adjust that difficulty in the way that he sees fit.
Yep.
If you want to do a easier run with BX, the GM can certainly do that. Depending now, I don't see that as a likely scenario because of the attitude of Grogs, but it can be done.
Yes.
In fact, I've seen it done because Godbound exists. and Stars Without Number and Worlds Without Number, all of which are from the madman known as Kevin Crawford.
Yep. Good work, that man.
Mm-hmm. I'd say utilizing a point-based pool when it comes to health, stamina, and magic, I'd say as a must. Um, when it comes to I'd say one of the trickier things is how do you represent the lore uncovering aspect. I would honestly say the way that you do that is more of a GM thing. The approach that I would take personally is putting clues in things like equipment and items, and
One of the many ways FromSoft already does it.
and not giving a whole lot of background detail to the players. Like if I was DMing a Dark Souls campaign, the main thing I would say to them is, you died, you came back as a chosen undead, and you are compelled to ring the bells of awakening. And as far as where you can find the bells of awakening, figure it out.
Porkchop is suggesting that for the poise part of the combat system, you have an overshield system. I'm not sure if the poise system would need to come into the tabletop, to be honest.
No. That a poise system feels like it's something that would be better served in a game that's trying to go all in on combat realism, like say Riddle of Steel or its successors. And although incidentally between the two, Blade of the I would say Blade of the Iron Throne might work in adaptation, but because of how casting can create corruption, no, not really. And the big problem with the idea of managing an overshield is that's one more pool that the player has to manage.
One more resource to track.
Mm-hmm. And we're already pushing it by asking them to track 3 resources at minimum.
Yeah. I suppose there could be stagger rules attached to going to 0 stamina, but that's minutia that we aren't quite considering right now.
Honestly, instead, as far as how I'd integrate poise, I would have a attack tier system, kind of an expanded rock paper scissors when it comes to what attack is going to go through when characters are simultaneously when you have that attack and defense.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just write it I would write it as a defensive stat, a defensive stat and an offensive stat. So and instead of refer to it as poise, refer to it as priority, with a grade between A through F.
I think making a system widget to track things is overcomplicating the situation, Porkchop.
Yeah.
You can make this game, even with the stagger and everything else, without needing more and more resources.
And the system widget is something that should be optional.
Yes.
No, like you don't need to use a dice rolling app.
Yeah.
And admittedly, I'm still not 100% on using that priority system. I'm just saying if I'd have to, that's the approach I'd take. But truth be told, go ahead.
Poise itself is a static modifier based on your endurance and the equipment you wear. Mm-hmm. You could literally use poise as the same type of stat in a tabletop game, and just say that an attack that has an attack value that meets or exceeds that poise, that static poise that you have, can cause stagger or knockdown, depending on how far beyond it is. You would not need a widget. You would not need a separate resource. It's just, oh, hey, this attack, you rolled an attack that meets or exceeds this person's poise stat. You've met it, they're staggering. Or you've exceeded it by a certain amount, like 25%, they're knocked prone. That's really all you have to do with it, really.
May I interject?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm not feeling so well, so I'm gonna leave.
All right, Star. Stay frosty. I'll see you next time.
Okay.
Peace out.
Bye.
But
She told me earlier she hasn't been feeling well all day, so I'm happy she stayed this long.
I do recall that in the version of Dice Souls that I have, the heavier that your equipment is, the bigger dice you'd have to use in order to or the bigger dice you'd have to use when spending stamina. And I think when you have that sort of caveat, especially given how Dice Souls handled stamina as a whole, poise isn't really necessary in that situation.
Yeah. Whereas we're going for poise as its own pool of resource. So, I mean, not poise, but stamina as its own pool of resource instead of pooled dice like in Dice Souls. So, having poise could still be a thing we could consider. I think that honestly, though, we're missing the forest for the trees right now.
Yeah. Because if I'm being honest, and I was up against the wall when making my own, I wouldn't even use poise. It would just overcomplicate things. It's one of those things that can work perfectly fine in a video game, but I'm not sure it translates well to combat on tabletop. Especially if you're using grid combat, which, given the emphasis on spacing, I think you'd have to dip into.
I think you could do a more abstract spacing scheme than just grid combat. You could have, for example, close, medium, and far.
I mean,
zone combat.
Yeah, we have our combat zones ourselves, but that was more out of convenience and genre emulation.
Yeah. Whereas in this, you could, for example, do zoned combat. You could have for example, for people who like to snipe or use magic, rather than being in close, medium, and far, they'd be in an entirely separate zone until somebody charges up to them. And then once you're within the same zone, that's where close, medium, or far with weapons matters. But that's just one way I can think of doing it more abstractly than doing actual grid-based combat.
Yeah. What I'd especially since in doing grid-based combat in the typical sense, for melee characters, they'd end up having a move action that they can't do anything with.
Yeah.
And as far as I'd say, I will say that a phase system when it comes to bosses or even sub bosses is an absolute must. I would probably have it that phase system is built around instead of a unified HP pool, you have a set of segregated HP pools for each phase.
Yeah.
Because the advancement of because I would say most of the boss fights that you see in Dark Souls, as their HP gets lower and lower, they start throwing in more tricks.
Yes. They get more tricks. In some cases, they change form entirely. And of course, they start hitting harder and moving differently or even faster. So there's definitely a need for a phase system, and I think, like you said, segregating it into separate health bars instead of making it one unified health bar That way you know one phase is down for sure and you have the next phase upcoming.
Mm-hmm. And the as far as whether or not I change the core stats of an enemy of a boss enemy in those phases, um, only if there's a smaller amount of them.
Yeah. I can think of only one core stat that would change, and that has to be speed. Because some enemies get faster when they go to phase 2. Others get slower, but then also get really weird movement styles.
And I will note that when it comes to attack speeds, that's a case of no, because attack
Nobody wants a Melania situation.
that and when AD&D tried to do the weapon speed thing,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't work.
Hmm.
And it didn't stick around.
I think the only real thing that weapon type should like, depending on the size and such, should affect is stamina use.
Pretty much, and for a good amount of the Dark Souls TTRPGs that I've dipped into, that's what it does.
Which is smart. You can't abstract everything from the games onto a TTRPG. It just isn't possible. Just doesn't suit the medium.
Mm-hmm. And the other one thing that I will note in that regard is the whole bonfire thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I feel like that kind of thing should be used as a downtime thing, or even better. I feel like the structure of a lot of Souls likes would be best served as a hex crawl.
I can see it. I can absolutely see it as a hex crawl.
Especially with the I wouldn't do a hex crawl of say the entire map that's used in Dark Souls, but I would do individual hex crawls for different areas.
Mm-hmm.
One for certain, and yet yes, this does mean that one of those specific areas would be Blight Town.
Gotta have our poison swamps. Gotta keep up the tradition.
It's either you know how Civi has the sewer count? Sometimes I feel like I should introduce a swamp count.
I mean, the swamp count would only really matter when it comes to the Dark Souls games.
The sole reason I didn't do it, is because of that specificity, and the fact that there's going to be more sewers than anything else, no matter what.
Mm. I think we can safely say that when it comes to Elden Ring, there are more swamps than sewers. There's at least 2. And only one set of sewers, and that's in Leyndell.
Mm-hmm. But but given a lot of the stuff that's mentioned, I think this is the reason why most of the Souls-like TTRPGs that I find do not use an established system because of the amount of stuff they'd have to change, and instead just build their own system from scratch.
Yeah. to adapt the things that they can adapt and then throw away the chaff.
And especially since a lot of the, that's not to say that people haven't used 5e or Savage Worlds or the like to do it. Just that there's more that do their own adaptation than anything, that do their own system than anything else.
I got it.
And I just realized one of the other ones I could have mentioned is the age system. And truth be told, I think the age system would have an easy, specifically the one that's used in Fantasy Age.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one would have an easier time. Because while it does have classes per se,
Mm-hmm.
it really only has 3: Mage, Rogue, and Warrior, and things are still pretty freeform. It wouldn't be the easiest to work with,
But it could work.
Yeah. Especially since even when you level up, a lot of the leveling up is getting a talent or a specialization.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let me look at Warrior. You have you get 2 starting talents, and you get armor training. Level 2, you get an ability focus. Level 3, you either get a talent or get a degree in a talent you already have.
Mm-hmm.
4, you get a specialization and a new weapon group. 5, you get talents and a stunt bonus.
And it goes on as such.
Yeah, a lot of it is. There's a handful of times where it's a specific class feature, but not all that much.
Yeah.
And incidentally, any game that uses weapon proficiency, out.
Yeah, because there's no such thing as a weapon proficiency in Soulsborne. You can use any weapon so long as you've got the equipment load for it.
Souls tends to instead have weapon prerequisites.
Yeah.
As well as weapon scaling.
Yeah. Well, and you can use those weapons without meeting some prerequisites, such as if we're going to use the Moonveil sword from Elden Ring, you could use the Moonveil katana without any issue. Just you wouldn't have any of the magic if you didn't have the intelligence requirement. Also, hello, brother Rick. How's it going?
You there, Rick?
Can't hear the man. And he does not seem to be typing. So but yeah, with the weapon requirements and growth system, the scaling that
Testing 1, 2, 3.
There you are, Rick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have my headset on mute.
Oops.
But yes, I'm here. I'm well and deadass tired.
Well, that happens to the best of us. But as a heads up, we're talking about Dark Souls into TTRPGs.
I'm well aware.
Okay.
I'm here for the third person outside of you.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You tend to be really good at that, actually, Rick, for a lot of things. But when it comes to, like I said, again, using Moonveil Katana as the example, you can still use the katana if you have the required dexterity. You just don't get the magic if you don't have the required intelligence. And even if you don't have the required physical stats for some You can still use them. You just don't use them very well. Your movement is hampered. Your swinging sucks. But I've seen people try to use them.
And well, fat rolling is a part of the lexicon.
Yep. When you have such a good loadout, but you just don't have enough endurance for the equipment weight.
Mm-hmm.
You make do with the fat rolling until you get an item that either lowers your weight, such as the Great Jar's Arsenal in Arsenal Talisman in Elden Ring, or things like the rings that give you those weight reductions, etc. It's all about give and take.
Mm-hmm. Now, I will note that if somebody asked me which ones I would recommend that isn't going to involve a whole lot of house ruling, the Dark Souls TRPG by Rooster Emma is the one that I'd recommend the most. In part because Rooster Emma is very, very good at his job. But there's also the fact that it is significantly well supported and well presented. If that isn't an option for you, there is one game that we've talked about in the past that might be a bit of a fit, but you'd have to make a little bit of tweaking. That being Sacrifice.
Yeah, Sacrifice could do it.
Mm-hmm.
Heck, Sacrifice even has a world for it.
And somebody once asked me how would you handle hollowing? Honestly, I wouldn't. I would not make the risk of hollowing a mechanic.
Yeah, hollowing. The risk of hollowing, while interesting from a lore perspective, in actuality, it's much more of an intrinsic game mechanic. It affects a lot of different things game-wise, including things like item discovery, which, that's very, very much something that's hard to translate into TRPG. So it's better to just go, yeah, hollowing's cool and all, but TRPG doesn't need it.
Mm-hmm. Rooster had adapted it using a mechanic called Sparks of Memory, but that's his choice, not necessarily mine.
Yeah, and the way that he did it probably worked really well for what he was trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. But one of the big reasons why I would suggest his version is that he also provided a system for age creation. i.e., his version is much like with what we're trying to do, although to a different approach. He's trying to adapt the feel of Dark Souls without needing to be in the exact same setting.
Yeah, you don't need to be in Lordran or any of the other places for that. Lordran or the Lands Between, or
And in fact, in addition to the character sheet, there is a world sheet that can be filled out. In his book, he creates an example of a world called Iverna, which has a short list of the lords and some of the things that they're themed around, as well as a list of covenants and a set of areas that can have bonfires. The one that's filled in is the Shrine of Silence, with a short list of its NPCs, boss, and features.
Yep.
I may do a full review of it, or something similar down the road. It is easy to access most of the RPG projects that Rooster Emma has done on his Patreon, even if a handful of the stuff is up there for free as well. Most recently, he's been working on his own Final Fantasy-like tabletop called Fabula Ultima, which got him a fair amount of acclaim in his home country. He even got to meet Sakaguchi, lucky bastard.
I would love to meet Sakaguchi, even if Sakaguchi no longer works on Final Fantasy games directly because he got his own studio now.
I may be mixing up Sakaguchi with Amano. I just know that he was able to meet one of them. But
well,
He got to meet with a developer. That's basically what we're saying.
Well, Hironobu Sakaguchi was the series creator, and Yoshitaka Amano was the series artist for the longest time. Still, it does series art for the artist. Or still does art for the series art.
Yep.
It's just no longer the main art that they use anymore.
Fair.
Except for the title art. They use Amano's artwork for the title art now a lot.
Yeah, but honestly, can you blame him?
No, Amano's fantastic. And Final Fantasy's artwork isn't even his best artwork, though. That's like comparing a 9 to a 10.
Very much.
Even though it's not, it doesn't use a particular rule set per se. I would also be remiss if I didn't bring up Embers of the Forgotten Kingdom, which is pretty much a lore book that is heavily inspired by the Souls games, but it doesn't have any actual stats.
Yeah, it's just a lore book.
They did put out a system compilation specifically for Shadow of the Demon Lord, however.
Hey!
Interesting.
So you do have that particular avenue. Plus, it's just I'd also recommend giving it a look just because of the quality of art that they were able to put together. But if I'm gonna be qualifying it just on that, one may as well grab that big ass Soul Arts book that Vati did.
That is a fantastic book, by the way. And he plans on doing the same with Elden Ring.
Of course he does. He seems to be very good at doing these crazy ass fan projects. But this is a lot of people have this attitude of it being ridiculous, that it's ridiculously easy to adapt certain IPs to role-playing games. And it usually begins and ends with somebody going, "Oh, you can just reskin X." If all that you're saying is that you can just reskin X, what you're really telling me is that you're too attached to a certain set of mechanics rather than trying to go for what is going to bring out the best spirit of what you're adapting.
There's a reason we didn't just adapt X and go forward with that, and instead pulled resources from all over.
One, we pulled resources from all over. Two, we did not want to adapt just one entry in the franchise, and three, even though we used Legend System as a base, we spent a lot of time filing off a lot of stuff from Legend System that had DNA of things we didn't want to go with.
DNA of things we didn't need. Yep. And we added a bunch of DNA from a bunch of other places too. I think we even have some Shadow of the Demon Lord in there, don't we?
Yes. Specifically the Boon and Bane system.
Yep.
Uh,
But the big thing is that if you want to capture the soul of a thing, which is what we're trying to do with FF Legend, and what we're trying to talk about here today with Dark Souls, you need to be prepared to take inspiration from anywhere that fits the soul of the thing, regardless of whether you like that or not. If you fail to capture that feeling, you've failed at your goal. So dismissing things you don't like or don't think are necessary out of hand is only hamstringing yourself.
And I know somebody might eventually go. But didn't you guys take out a bunch of stuff you didn't like when reconstructing Ruby? Everything that we took out or replaced when trying to create the setting that we did for the Ruby reconstruction was done with a purpose.
Yeah. We were looking at the flaws of what exists and trying to remove those flaws in preparation for what we were going to add.
Or in some cases, fill in holes.
Yep.
Because some hack writers have this idea of introducing a story that already has holes right out of the gate with the promise of filling them later. This is where a good example of this is the mystery box philosophy that J.J. Abrams espouses.
And we went over that in that GeekWatch episode too.
And the problem with doing that is you're essentially doing a rainy day thing on yourself. And no matter how hard you try, eventually you're gonna have. The longer you put off filling in that hole, even if it's internally before the audience sees it, the more unfulfilling it's going to be.
Yeah, audience is not going to feel very happy about it.
And in some situations, you can end up with a Gynax ending.
Don't we love Gynax endings? Don't we just?
You'll notice that few other people fall into the trap of a Gynax ending outside of Gynax themselves.
Can they even fall into a Gynax ending anymore, considering their situation?
There's a non-zero chance.
I was gonna say,
I'm not gonna say that it certainly is it's very unlikely, but unlikely does not mean impossible.
True.
Mostly because a lot of people who end up writing their endings either do it properly or they leave things open-ended just in case.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even one of our favorite guys, Riku Sanjo, tends to go for the open-ended approach instead of definitive endings.
Well, and I think that's more due to the fact that with the works he does where we see him, those stories are a snapshot in time for someone's overall larger life. Especially if we look at his tokusatsu work. Just because a tokusatsu hero saves the day doesn't mean they stop being a tokusatsu hero.
oh yeah,
I would say that they're better heroes than Marvel, but that's
Low bar. Super low bar, in fact.
oh yeah.
That bar's so low you can't limbo under it.
It's on the ground, Monk. You left it on the ground.
It's not even on the ground. It's not even off the ground. It's stuck in the ground.
But I think with that we've covered everything we need to for this particular topic. Um, we will not we will not be doing Geek Watch next Sunday because next Sunday is Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No Geek Watch on Christmas.
I mean,
Just like no World War I on Christmas.
yeah,
For a year, and then they said, nope, can't have that.
now as far as New Year's Day, that's going to be an internal discussion, and I will make an update on that matter on the Discord, when the time comes, as well as on my Twitter. So keep an eye out on that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe if there's enough people around who aren't doing anything because everybody's recovering from Christmas Eve, maybe I'll consider doing a chaos stream, but don't count on it. Or barring that, I might just do a screen share on the Discord and play some random game, probably something light, because the stock exchange is closed on the 26th, which means I don't work.
Yep.
But that doesn't mean that we don't have things coming this week. Tune in on Wednesday because we are going to be doing a hangover stream regarding the 2022 Game Awards. We will not be discussing the awards themselves because that's not what we do.
Yeah, don't even try, guys. If you try to discuss, well, do you think X or Y should have won? Not what we're here for. If any of you have been here before for our hangover shit shows, this is us pulling the diamonds from the rough and showing you, look, assholes, there's plenty of choice out there. Fuck off with your fatalism.
Mm-hmm.
What he said.
I do only have one review this week, and that is with Brothers Grimm Studios talking about their Universalist miniature war game called War Surge, which I will admit I am backing because I want to take a look at what they're doing to see if I may use it to adapt some of the ideas that I have that don't really fit a TTRPG setup. Like somebody asked me if I'd ever try and adapt Fire Emblem into TTRPG, and I said, 1, it's already been done. 2, I feel like Fire Emblem is better served as with a skirmish war game than with an RPG.
Fair, much fair. Especially depending on what particular game you were taking the most inspiration from.
Well, if I'm doing Fire Emblem, I'm doing what we're doing with FF Legend.
Fair.
No single Fire Emblem, just the same as capturing the soul of Fire Emblem. And no, we do not mean capturing the soul of Fire Emblem as per fucking the Fire Emblem Tokyo. Can't even say the name without laughing.
Tokyo Mirage Sessions.
Yes. No, thank you.
I would quality aside, I would put that in its own bubble because it's its own beast, since it's trying to be a midway point between Fire Emblem and Mega 10.
Mega 10 and a bit of Persona.
Remember
that's another story.
You know the relationship between Mega 10 and Persona, right?
Of course.
I might need a refresher, but we can do that later.
It's a spin-off.
Have a feeling.
Yeah, but...
Oh yeah, Megami 10. You said Shin Megami. Never mind.
I said Mega 10, which is the shorthand for Shin Megami Tensei.
Yeah, it took me a second to realize it. Mm-hmm. It took me a second to realize that's what you said.
Mm-hmm. That said, this Friday we will be doing the finale of our Valley of the Judge series on Otherworlds and giving our final thoughts. And I do have a few things planned for next week, but again, we will see regarding New Year's Day. Because while I certainly will have it off, and I've frequently called New Year's Day National Hangover Day. I'm not.
It
I don't
usually
have.
is.
I don't have 100% confirmation with everybody else. But I do. But we are. But now that I'm no longer on the mend, we are back to our regularly scheduled bullshit. Thank the Lord. I hate being sick and not being able to do shit.
Wait, isn't? Hold on a second, Monk. Yeah, New Year's Day is that Sunday. That's true. Yeah.
Yep, that's about right.
Yeah, I had to adjust. I had to make a few calls because Christmas Eve and Christmas Day are on the weekend this year.
Yeah. A lot of people still observe Christmas Eve and Christmas Day on the Friday and the Monday. So a lot of companies I know of.
Yeah, and
That's
mine does.
Besides the point.
But that is all a story for another day. So please look forward to it. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk, and join the watch.